My name is Marcus, and I've been carrying this weight for over 20 years now. 20 years of looking over my shoulder, 20 years of sleepless nights, 20 years of knowing that I witnessed something that should have never happened. But silence has its price, and today I'm breaking mine. I was there when it all went down. I saw with my own eyes how everything crumbled. Everyone thought Tookie Williams was untouchable, a street king, respected and feared by rivals, cops, even his own allies. But the truth is the threat never came from outside. The betrayal started inside our own house. Back in the day, South Central Los Angeles was our kingdom. The red bandanas, the hand signs, the respect that came with walking these streets, it all meant something. Tookie wasn't just our leader, he was our brother, our father figure to some of us young cats who had nothing else. He pulled me off the streets when I was 16, hungry and angry at the world. Gave me purpose, gave me family. Blood in, blood out, he used to say. We die for each other, we live for each other. Those words used to mean everything. Used to. The Crips were our enemies. That was clear, that was simple. Blue versus red, east versus west. But what I learned the hard way is that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one sleeping in the bed next to you, the one you share your last meal with, the one you trust with your life. It started small, like poison always does. Little things that you don't notice until it's too late. Whispers in corners when Tookie wasn't around. Guys complaining about how the money was being split, about who was getting the best territory, about who was closest to the boss. There was this cat named Jerome, we called him J-Rock, who'd been running with Tookie since the early days. Dude was solid, or so we thought. He had this way of talking that made you feel like you were part of something special, like you were family. But I started noticing how his eyes would change when Tookie walked into a room, how his smile would get just a little too tight, how his laugh would sound just a little too forced. "Marcus," he'd say to me when we were alone, "you ever think about what would happen if something happened to Tookie? I mean, who'd run things? Who'd take care of the soldiers?" At first I thought it was just concern, you know, like he was worried about succession planning or some shit. But the way he kept bringing it up, the way he'd watch Tookie, during meetings, the way he'd count the money just a little too carefully, it all started adding up to something ugly. The crack epidemic was hitting hard in '85, and business was booming. Money was flowing like water, but with that much cash comes that much temptation. Tookie was smart about it. He kept his hands relatively clean, focused on the organizational side while letting his lieutenants handle the day-to-day operations. But some of the younger guys, they were getting hungry. They saw all that money and they wanted their bigger piece. "Tookie's getting soft," I heard one of them say during a dice game behind the liquor store on Crenshaw. "Talking about community this, community that. We're out here risking our lives, and he's worried about after-school programs." See, that's what they didn't understand about Tookie. The man had vision. He wasn't just thinking about next week's profits. He was thinking about legacy, about building something that could last. But to these knucklehead soldiers, all they saw was an old man getting in the way of their money. The first real sign of trouble came when Tookie decided to pull back on some of the more violent activities. He was trying to transition the organization, make it more sustainable, less heat from the police. But J-Rock and his crew saw it as weakness. "We built this shit on fear and respect," J-Rock told me one night when we were posted up outside the rec center. "Now he wants us to be social workers? Man, fuck that. The streets don't respect community gardens, they respect power." I should have seen it then. Should have known that when a soldier starts questioning the general's strategy in public, the war is already lost. But loyalty runs deep, and I couldn't imagine that the same cats I'd shed blood with would turn on the man who made us all. The conspiracy grew slowly, like cancer. J-Rock was smart about it. He didn't recruit everyone at once. He started with the guys who had grievances, the ones who felt overlooked or underpaid. Then he moved to the ambitious ones, the guys who thought they could run things better. Finally, he got to the scared ones, the guys who were worried about being left behind if things changed. One by one, he built his coalition. One by one, the loyalty that held our family together started to crack. I remember the night everything changed. It was a Tuesday in October 1985. Tookie had called a meeting at the usual spot, an abandoned warehouse on the east side, where we'd gather to discuss business. But something felt different from the moment I walked in. The usual chatter was missing. Guys were standing in different groups, and there was this tension in the air that made my skin crawl. Tookie walked in like he always did, confident, commanding, wearing that red leather jacket that had become his signature. But I noticed how some of the guys wouldn't make eye contact with him, how J-Rock kept checking his watch, how there were more soldiers there than usual for a regular meeting. "Brothers," Tookie started, his voice carrying across the warehouse, "we need to talk about our future. The heat's getting too heavy, and we need to adapt, or we're going to lose everything we've built." That's when J-Rock made his move. "Nah, Tookie," he said, standing up from where he'd been leaning against a crate. "We need to talk about your future." The warehouse went dead silent. You could hear rats scurrying in the walls, hear the distant sound of traffic. On the street outside, Tookie's face didn't change expression, but I saw his hand move slightly toward his waistband. "What did you say?" Tookie's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of years of authority. J-Rock smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who thought he held all the cards. "I said we need to talk about your future. See, the boys and we've been talking. We think maybe it's time for some new leadership around here. Time for someone who understands what the streets really need." That's when I realized how deep the betrayal ran. As J-Rock spoke, more and more of our so-called brothers stepped forward, positioning themselves behind him. Guys I'd known for years, guys I'd taken bullets for, guys I'd shared my last dollar with. They were all standing against the man who'd given them everything. But what broke my heart more than anything was seeing the look in Tookie's eyes. Not fear. Tookie Williams never showed fear. It was disappointment. Deep, crushing disappointment at seeing his family turn against him. "You sure about this, Jerome?" Tookie asked, using J-Rock's real name for the first time in years. "You sure this is the path you want to walk?" "I'm sure," J-Rock replied. "The question is, are you going to make this easy or hard?" That's when the guns came out. Not Tookie's gun. He never reached for it. But J-Rock's crew, they were ready. They had this plan down to the last detail. They knew exactly where everyone would be standing, exactly how to box Tookie in with nowhere to run. I was standing off to the side, frozen. Part of me wanted to step forward, to stand with the man who'd saved my life. But another part of me, the part that wanted to see another sunrise, kept my feet planted. I'm not proud of that. I'll carry that shame until the day I die. 20 years, Jerome, Tookie said, his voice steady even with 5 guns pointed at him. 20 years we've been brothers. 20 years I've had your back. And this is how you repay that? Business is business, J-Rock replied, but I could hear the slight tremor in his voice. Even a traitor has moments of doubt. Nothing personal. Everything is personal, Tookie shot back. That's what made us strong. That's what made us family. But I guess you forgot what family means. The first shot came from a kid named Little Mike. Couldn't have been more than 19 years old. His hand was shaking so bad I thought he might miss, but the bullet caught Tookie in the shoulder, spinning him around. That's when the floodgates opened. I won't describe what happened next in detail. Some things are too ugly to put into words. But I will say this, even as they gunned him down, even as his own soldiers betrayed him, Tookie Williams died like he lived. On his feet, looking his enemies in the eye, never showing weakness. When it was over, when the smoke cleared and the echoes of gunfire faded, we all stood there looking at what we'd become. The king was dead, killed by his own knights. The family was broken, destroyed by greed and jealousy, and the poisonous whispers of men who thought they deserved more than they'd earned. J-Rock tried to take control after that, tried to step into Tookie's shoes. But leadership earned through betrayal never lasts. The respect was gone, the trust was broken, and within 6 months the whole organization had fallen apart. Some guys went to rival gangs, some went to prison, some just disappeared into the streets. As for me, I got out. Changed my name, moved across the country, started over. But you can't run from your memories, and you can't hide from your conscience. Every night for 20 years, I've seen Tookie's face in my dreams. Every morning for 20 years, I've woken up with the weight of my silence pressing down on my chest. They say blood is thicker than water, but I learned that night that greed is thicker than blood. I learned that loyalty is just a word until it's tested, and that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones most capable of breaking your heart. I'm telling this story now because the truth needs to be told, because Tookie Williams deserves better than the lies and myths that have grown up around his death. He wasn't perfect, none of us were. But he was loyal to his people, and his people weren't loyal to him. The official story was that Tookie was killed in a drive-by shooting by rival gang members. That's what the police reported. That's what the newspapers printed. That's what everyone believed. But I know the truth, and now you do too. The real tragedy isn't just that Tookie Williams died. It's that he died believing in something that was already dead. The idea that brotherhood means something, that loyalty matters, that family is sacred. J-Rock and his crew killed more than just a man that night. They killed an idea, a belief, a way of life that had held our community together. In the end, the betrayers got what they deserved. J-Rock was found face down in an alley 2 years later, 3 bullets in the back of his head. Little Mike overdosed on his own product within 18 months. Most of the others ended up dead or in prison before their 25th birthdays. But their fate doesn't bring Tookie back. It doesn't undo the betrayal or heal the wounds they opened that night in the warehouse. It doesn't give me back the sleep I've lost or the peace I'll never find. I'm an old man now, living under a different name in a different state, trying to make amends for the choices I made and didn't make all those years ago. I volunteer at youth centers, try to steer kids away from the life I lived, tell them that respect earned through fear is just borrowed time, and that real power comes from lifting people up, not tearing them down. But sometimes late at night when the world is quiet, I think about that warehouse and wonder what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to stand with Tookie. Wonder if one more loyal soldier could have made a difference. Wonder if the king could have survived the treachery of his own knights. I'll never know the answer to that question, and that's a burden I'll carry to my grave. But at least now the truth is out there. At least now people will know that Tookie Williams didn't die in some random act of street violence. He died because he trusted the wrong people, because he believed in loyalty when everyone around him had already embraced betrayal. The streets don't forget, but sometimes they lie. Today I'm setting the record straight. Today I'm breaking my silence and honoring the memory of a man who deserved better from his brothers, better from his family, better from me. Blood in, blood out. That's what Tookie used to say. But in the end it was the blood that flowed out that mattered most. It was the blood of a king, spilled by his own knights, that stained all of us forever. What haunts me most isn't the sound of the gunshots or the sight of Tookie falling. It's the silence that came after. The way we all just stood there, breathing heavy, looking at each other like we didn't know who we were anymore. J-Rock tried to say something, tried to rally the troops, but his words fell flat. You can't build loyalty on the grave of the man who taught you what loyalty meant. I remember the smell in that warehouse, gunpowder mixed with fear, blood mixing with the dust on the concrete floor. Some of the younger cats were crying, others were throwing up in the corner. Even the hardest soldiers among us knew we'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. We'd killed our own father, and no amount of money or territory could wash that sin away. The cleanup was sloppy, rushed. J-Rock was panicking, barking orders like he was in control, but everyone could see he was falling apart. We wrapped Tookie's body in a tarp, loaded it into the back of a stolen pickup truck, and drove it to a spot near the railroad tracks where bodies had a way of disappearing. But you can't make guilt disappear as easy as you can make a corpse vanish. 3 days later, the story hit the streets that Tookie had been gunned down by Crips in a drive-by. J-Rock had paid off some witnesses, bribed a couple of cops, made sure the narrative fit what people expected to hear. Gang leader killed by rivals. It was simple, clean, believable. Nobody questioned it because nobody wanted to believe that the Bloods would eat their own. But the streets know things, even when they can't prove them. Whispers started almost immediately. Questions about why nobody saw the shooters, why there were no tire marks, why Tookie's bodyguards weren't with him that night. The story had holes, and smart people started noticing. That's when the paranoia set in. J-Rock couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't trust anyone around him. He'd wake up in the middle of the night convinced that Tookie's loyal soldiers were coming for revenge. He'd change apartments every few weeks. Change cars, change routines. The crown he'd killed for was turning into a noose around his neck. The first crack in J-Rock's reign came when Tookie's cousin Big Willie rolled back into town from Oakland. Willie had been locked up when the murder happened, but when he got out and heard the official story, he knew it was bullshit. Tookie would never have been caught slipping in Crip territory without backup. Willie started asking questions, pressing people, offering money for the real story. I was working at a garage on Vermont Avenue when Willie found me. I was under the hood of a '78 Cadillac when I felt a shadow fall across me. When I looked up, there was Willie, 6'4", 300 pounds of muscle and rage, wearing a red bandana like a crown. "We need to talk, Marcus," he said, and his voice carried the same authority that Tookie's used to have. "About my cousin, about what really happened that night." I tried to play dumb, told him I didn't know anything beyond what everyone else knew, but Willie wasn't buying it. He grabbed me by the shirt, lifted me off the ground like I weighed nothing, and looked me straight in the eyes. "Don't insult me, little brother," he said. "I know you were there. I know you saw everything. And I know you've been carrying that weight ever since." That's when I broke down. 20 years of holding that secret. 20 years of lying to everyone, including myself, and it all came pouring out. I told Willie everything. About the conspiracy, about J-Rock's recruitment, about the meeting, about the murder. By the time I finished, we were both crying. Willie didn't kill me for my cowardice, though part of me wished he would have. Instead, he put his massive hand on my shoulder and said something I'll never forget. "Tookie always said that a man's worst enemy is his own fear. You let fear make you a witness instead of a brother. But maybe it's not too late to make that right." The war that followed wasn't loud or flashy. It wasn't about territories or colors or public displays of power. It was surgical, precise, personal. One by one, the conspirators started disappearing. Little Mike was found in an alley, overdosed on poisoned heroin. Another soldier named Damon was discovered in the trunk of his own car, beaten to death with a baseball bat. J-Rock knew he was next. He tried to run, tried to disappear into the anonymous sprawl of Los Angeles, but you can't hide from ghosts. Willie found him in a Fleabag motel in Compton, cowering in a corner like the coward he'd always been underneath all that bravado. The details of what Willie did to J-Rock before he killed him aren't fit for telling. Let's just say that J-Rock had plenty of time to think about his betrayal, plenty of time to regret his choices, plenty of time to understand what it felt like to be helpless and abandoned by the people you trusted. But revenge didn't bring Tookie back, and it didn't heal the wound that his murder had opened in the community. The Bloods never recovered from that betrayal. The organization splintered into dozens of smaller sets, each claiming to be the real heirs to Tookie's legacy, each fighting the others for scraps of territory and respect that had once belonged to a unified family. The kids growing up in South Central today don't even know who Tookie Williams really was. They know the legend, the co-founder of the Crips, who later became a Blood, the man who tried to make peace between the sets, the reformed gang leader who wrote children's books from death row. But they don't know the man I knew, the father figure who pulled lost boys off the streets and gave them purpose and family. They don't know about his vision for something bigger, something better than just another street gang. Tookie saw the Bloods as more than just muscle and money. He saw them as protectors of the community, as a force that could lift up the neighborhood instead of tearing it down. That dream died with him in that warehouse, murdered by the very people he'd trusted to help him build it. I think about that a lot these days. About dreams deferred, about potential unrealized, about what South Central might have looked like if Tookie had lived to see his vision through. Maybe there would have been less violence, less drugs, less young men bleeding out on street corners over colors and corners that don't really belong to anybody. But maybe that's just an old man's fantasy. Maybe the streets were always destined to eat their own. Maybe loyalty was always just a pretty word that crumbled under pressure. Maybe Tookie's dream was doomed from the start. I don't know. All I know is that we had something beautiful for a moment, and we threw it away for 30 pieces of silver and the promise of easy money. The hardest part of carrying this story isn't the guilt, though that's heavy enough. It's the loneliness. For 20 years, I've been the only living witness to the truth of what happened to Tookie Williams. Everyone else who was there is dead now, killed by rivals, killed by their own paranoia, killed by the streets that made them and ultimately consumed them. Sometimes I wonder if I should have taken that secret to my grave, if some truths are too dangerous to tell. But then I think about Tookie's children, about his legacy, about the lies that have been told about how he died. He deserves better than that. His memory deserves the truth, even if the truth is ugly and painful and makes cowards of us all. The nightmares started about a month after the murder. I'd see Tookie's face in my dreams, not angry or accusatory, just sad, disappointed. He'd look at me with those eyes that had once shown so much hope for what we could become, and I'd wake up in a cold sweat, sheets soaked with guilt and shame. The dreams never stopped. They just became part of my nightly routine, like brushing my teeth or locking the door. I tried everything to make them go away. Alcohol, drugs, women, anything to numb the pain and silence the voice in my head that kept asking why I didn't speak up, why I didn't act, why I chose survival over honor. But nothing worked. The guilt followed me everywhere, a shadow that grew longer with each passing day. The closest I came to breaking was about 5 years after the murder. I was living in Detroit then, working construction, trying to build a new life away from the blood-stained streets of Los Angeles. I met this girl named Sandra. Sweet, innocent, nothing like the hard women from the neighborhood I'd left behind. She made me want to be better, made me think maybe I could put the past behind me and start fresh. But you can't build a future on a foundation of lies. One night, after too many drinks and too many questions about my past, I almost told Sandra everything. The words were right there on my tongue, ready to spill out like poison from a wound. But at the last second, I caught myself. Some burdens are too heavy to share, especially with someone you love. Sandra left me eventually. She said I was like a closed book, that she could never really know me because I wouldn't let her in. She was right, of course. How could I let her into a heart that was already occupied by ghosts? How could I share my bed with her when Tookie's spirit was already sleeping there every night? The hardest part wasn't losing Sandra. It was realizing that I'd never be able to have a normal relationship, a normal life, as long as I carried this secret. The murder hadn't just killed Tookie. It had killed a part of me too, the part that could trust, that could love without reservation, that could sleep peacefully through the night. I started going to churches after that, not because I found religion, but because I was desperate for forgiveness. I'd sit in the back pew of different congregations, listening to preachers talk about redemption and grace and the power of truth to set you free. But every time I considered confessing to a priest or pastor, I'd remember the look in J-Rock's eyes when he realized Willie had found him, and I'd keep my mouth shut. The gang landscape changed completely in the years after Tookie's death. New sets emerged, old alliances crumbled, and the code of honor that had once governed street life became just another casualty of the drug wars. Kids were getting initiated younger and dying faster, and the sense of brotherhood that had once held communities together was replaced by paranoia and greed. I watched from a distance as Los Angeles tore itself apart. The crack epidemic exploded, taking with it entire neighborhoods and generations of young men. The police response got more militaristic, more violent, creating an atmosphere where everyone was a potential enemy. And through it all, I couldn't help but think that things might have been different if Tookie had lived, if his vision of organized, principled resistance had survived the betrayal. There were times when I thought about going back, about trying to make amends by working with at-risk youth or community organizations. But every time I got close to returning to Los Angeles, something would hold me back. Maybe it was cowardice, or maybe it was the realistic fear that someone who remembered that night might recognize me and decide that all witnesses needed to be eliminated, even ones who'd kept their mouths shut for decades.